welcome everyone. It's great to be here today with the Education Minister, Sarah Mitchell, and our Public Health Officer, Dr. Kerry Chan, in announcing some further changes to school operation here in our state. So obviously there have been some restrictions in place here in New South Wales. We've had incredible success in setting out to achieve getting kids back in school on day one of term one. And a lot of that success has been because of the efforts and sacrifices that parents and teachers have made across our state. I know those rapid antigen tests for many parents have been a challenge with their children, but ultimately it's ensured that we've been able to instill confidence in our parents and our teachers that we can operate schools in a safe way. And I particularly want to thank Sarah Mitchell, the Education Minister, and the entire teams in health and education who have been able to deploy, run a substantive operation to distribute those rapid antigen tests across schools right across our state. And ultimately now, as we've said, from next week, rapid antigen tests will not be required from a surveillance testing basis 2 days a week, but we will be supplying and providing those tests to parents, two per week for the next 2 weeks. And in addition to that, a family pack of 4 per child going forward, and they are to be used if your child has symptoms or for peace of mind going forward. The other changes we are announcing today from next week is that provisions that have been in place in relation to cohorting class groups will end, and in addition to that as well, parents will be allowed back on school sites, which we've obviously restricted as we've commenced the school year. In relation to face masks for teachers and students in high school, they will also cease from next week, and then in the following week, being from Monday the 7th of March, we will cease face masks for teachers in schools. We were able to make these changes because of the efforts and sacrifices that people have made right across our state. Dr. Kerry Chan will soon give a health update, but these changes are incredibly important. We need to make sure that kids are back in school in a safe way. We have been focused on this. It's not just a health crisis during a pandemic. There are other challenges as well, and it's incredibly important that we provide our children with the best learning environment possible. So these changes today, I believe, will make a real difference to the face-to-face learning in both primary schools and secondary schools. And that's incredibly important for the learning outcomes for our children. As the Education Minister often says, we know that particularly for many of our younger children, some through the pandemic have lost a quarter of their face-to-face school time. So there were many people at the time who said it was unsafe to put kids back in the classroom. We had many people out there saying, and I think, unfortunately, instilling fear in the community in terms of getting our kids back to school. The government has done exactly the right thing here. In terms of being completely focused on getting kids back in the classroom, I really do want to thank our teachers because they've been under additional pressure. They've had to make changes to the start of schooling here in our state. I want to thank our parents because it has been incredibly successful to date. It's much better than I expected in terms of we obviously expected bumps along the road, but I think the efforts and the efforts that our teachers and our parents have made has ensured a very seamless transition back to school. And that's not just important for our educational outcomes for our children, but in addition to that, as we move back to normality here in our state and right across the country as we move through this pandemic. So I want to thank the teachers, thank the parents, and I think these changes will make a real difference to school life right across our state. Now I'm going to pass to Sarah Mitchell, who will provide an update, obviously in support of the decision we've made today, and then Dr. Kerry Chan will provide a public health update.
Morning everybody, thanks Premier. Well look, next week we'll start to see our schools return pretty much back to normal after nearly 2 years of having different settings in our schools in relation to the COVID pandemic. And like the Premier, I also want to thank all of not just our teachers, but our school staff, our principals, our admin staff, everybody who's worked really hard to ensure that our schools have been COVID safe. We've had a great start to the school year. I'm so pleased with how things are going, but now's the time to actually get back to normal, give our kids a bit of a taste of some of those activities and things that many of them would not have experienced much at all during their time at school. So as the Premier said, from next week we will be relaxing the cohorting. We won't need to be keeping year groups separate from each other anymore. And I guess what that means in practice for students are things like, kindergarten to year 6 buddy programs, choirs or student councils or dramatic plays that might take place across year groups. We'll be able to do that again. And I think for a lot of our kids, they do really miss that sort of stuff. Being able to play with someone in an older or younger year group or check on a sibling, all of that's been really tough and we haven't been able to do that. Now we'll get back to normal in terms of what we can offer in our schools, but also in the playground. I also know for our teachers and principals, the admin task of managing that cohorting, staggering break times, separate play areas has been quite a challenge, and we are so grateful to them for doing that. But again, that's now one less thing that our teachers and principals will need to worry about, which I think is important. For parents, obviously, speaking as a mum myself, I think we've all missed being as involved as we'd like to be in our kids' education. We've had parents back for a volunteer capacity now throughout this term, but to be able to come back on for assemblies and events, I think will be great that parents and carers can be back and more involved with our child's education, particularly again, not having had the opportunity to do that as we normally would over the last little while. As the Premier said, when it comes to mask wearing, from next Monday, none of our high school students or staff will be required to wear masks anymore. And from the following Monday, the 7th of March, those restrictions will ease for our primary school staff and also our early childhood education staff. And we've landed on these measures in conjunction with New South Wales Health. It's about making sure we take a safe and sensible approach, but also that we recognise that our schools are doing an amazing job keeping our students in the classroom. It's time to offer a bit more normality to our students and our staff. Thank you to everybody who has worked with us to ensure that we've been able to do this, and looking forward to seeing, I know, some exciting faces from next week onwards when we start to see our school life return to normal.
So currently we have over 95% of people aged 16 plus have had one dose, and 94%, 4.3% aged 16 plus have had 2 doses of the COVID vaccine. Across New South Wales, we've got 52.2% of people aged 16 years and over received a booster dose, and 56.2% of the eligible population have received a booster. So it's pleasing to see those numbers continue to rise. Our children in the age group 5 to 11-year-olds, we've got 46.9% have had their first dose of the COVID vaccine, and I just would urge parents to really come forward and get their child vaccinated. The vaccines are very safe and effective, and it is important that we get those vaccination coverage levels up higher. We've got 1,246 people in hospital, including 69 people in ICU, of whom 29 are ventilated, and we have 8,931 positive tests returned, including 5,661 positive rapid antigen tests and 3,270 positive PCR tests. The PCR tests, the 3,270 positive PCR results, were returned from 35,993 PCR tests. Sadly, today we're announcing the deaths of 6 people with COVID, 4 women and 2 men, and can I offer my condolences to their families. 3 people were aged in their 80s, 3 were in their 90s, and 3 people had received the 3 doses of the vaccine, 2 had received 2 doses, and 1 person was not vaccinated. Can I just also extend my appreciation to families for continuing to keep their child at home if they've got any symptoms of COVID, continue to get them promptly tested. Those very practical measures are really reducing the risk of transmission in our schools. As we move in this transition arrangement, it is going to be important that we continue to do that. So thank you very much for parents for doing that so diligently.
Question?
What's the health advice behind the extension of mask wearing for primary schools and high schools?
So as you're aware, the high school students have had quite a while to get their double dose, and that eligibility for boosters will be for the 16 to 18-year-olds. But as you're aware, that group has actually had quite a while to was vaccinated back in, I think, September, October, when that vaccine became available. So the idea is that we're just staggering the removal of masks in primary school just to give parents a little bit more time to get their children vaccinated. And I can't urge parents enough to please go out and get vaccinated.
Dr. Chan, we've heard that the AHPPC is considering dropping the requirement for isolation for household contacts. Do you support that as a measure?
Look, I don't comment on the AHPCC discussions. I suppose just in a broad terms, we're obviously got to continue to recalibrate our response going forward. But I should say that household contacts of a case, and I think we've released some data from our studies in schools, demonstrates that households are most at risk. Clearly, transmission is going to be quite high in households. I think it was about 70% from the study compared to what a minuscule percentage in schools. And so people still need to be aware that that very household close contact presents those higher risks, and we just need to set in proportionate measures.
Just in terms of that transmission in schools over the past 4 weeks, what has been the experience in schools in terms of the number of kids or the spread of the virus in schools?
Well, clearly children have the highest rate of COVID diagnosis at the moment. That's both the 0 to 9-year-olds and the 10 to 19-year-olds. And that's probably driven by a few factors, and that's why I was actually thanking parents for their diligence in getting their children tested. The availability of the surveillance and now the RAT test for symptomatic testing means that it's removed a barrier to getting tested, which has been really important. And the school system's a very equitable system for distributing products because it reaches and touches everyone in the community. So the question is, yes, they are represented as a high case rate in terms of children, and we do see that blip probably associated with parents being particularly diligent as the school week starts in terms of getting their children tested, and but how it compares to transmission in other age groups is a little bit less clear. But what's important is the measures. We're still having a flexible approach, so in discussions with the Minister, there will be times where schools can flex up and flex down if there is a letter going out to parents to say that there's been a number of cases in the schools. The school community now is very, I think, practiced at sort of understanding how to prevent transmission, the signs and symptoms to look for in terms of COVID, and what they should do to protect themselves and others as we try and really reduce the transmission in the school setting.
When you lifted the mask requirement that's going to come into force on Friday just for the general population, there was still a recommendation where you couldn't social distance to still wear masks inside. Is this the same message for a classroom?
So look, I think if we 2022 is going to be around having proportionate measures to the circumstances we've got. There may be times in the future where we've got to come out and say mandate masks. We've talked about the emergence of new variants. We've talked about waves that we might have for winter. So we're having I think this is the time where we're wanting to have proportionate and appropriate measures. But my role as a public health physician is to tell people that masks are an effective mitigant. It's most effective when 2 people are wearing them. So I think in the messaging I've been giving, I've been asking businesses and other settings to actually think about the people that might be being serviced in those areas or being present, and make their own assessments of the settings that they have. So for instance, please, if someone is choosing to come into your shop and wearing a mask, please don't in any way dissuade them or actually be very supportive of that, because that person may have an underlying health condition, and progressively we would be encouraging people to continue to wear some of those, take those protective actions. And similarly, we've had representations from members of the public who feel that when they're in shared spaces of apartment buildings and other things, they're just asking other members in that community to actually just be cognizant that they might have been undergoing chemotherapy, they might be undergoing other health treatments, and they requesting people to just take those preventative actions of maintaining that social distance and considering if they're going to be in confined spaces with them, could they wear a mask. It's just about us being part of society and doing our bit to particularly protect the most vulnerable in society.
Just a question, Mr. Minister Mitchell, if I can. We saw at West Carlingford, there was a cluster there, a lot of kids had to switch to remote learning.
Yep.
Are we going to see a lot more of that occurring, and what's the message to schools about how do they adapt to that?
Yeah. So look, obviously, I guess picking up on what Dr. Chant has just said, we do see relatively low transmission in our schools, and some work that was done towards the end of last term by the NCIRS, particularly on our New South Wales school settings, was that I think, as Kerry just mentioned, in a household setting, you're looking at a 70% chance of transmission. In our school settings, it was between 3 and 4%. So it was much, much lower than you would see in other areas. And indeed, you could probably extrapolate from that, children are probably more at risk in other settings than they are at school. The reality is we haven't had to close any schools at all this year due to COVID cases, but there has been a relatively small number of schools that have had to take extra measures. And again, that probably taps into what Dr. Chant has just said. From time to time in school communities, we have said there may be bumps along the way, there may be circumstances where a particular year group or cohort needs to learn at home. That was certainly the case at Carlingford West for 3 days. We've also seen it in some of our support units in some of our schools for specific purposes. So again, children who generally have a little bit more complex comorbidities, we have taken a cautious approach in some of those settings, and it was probably remiss of me not to mention at the beginning that staff in our SSPs and our support units will continue to wear masks given that it is a higher risk setting for those students. So look, this is all about getting the balance right. We've done it in conjunction with Dr. Chant and her team. I think our school communities are well versed to manage these things going forward. Transmission, as I said, is still very low in our school communities, very low numbers of impacts in terms of any learning from home. And of course, we still will see COVID safe measures in schools. We still have enhanced cleaning. We still have maximum natural ventilation as well. So even as parents going onto school sites, you might find that your assembly is a bit different. You probably won't all be in the hall. You might be outside under a learning area or out on a sporting field. So schools will do this in a way that is safe and sensible. But as I said, it's about getting that balance right as we start to really open up some of these opportunities for our kids to enjoy that full school experience that so many of them have missed out on for too long.
Was there consultation with the Teachers Federation before this morning's announcement in regards to the timing of when to make these changes, and if schools and teachers would have enough time to get rid of the cohorting and get the message out to communities?
Yeah, well, like I said, we speak to our stakeholders regularly, and indeed particularly talking to the other school sectors across the Catholic and independent schools as well. Look, the reality is what we're announcing today will actually make it easier for our teachers and principals. Saying today that from next Monday the masks aren't required in the secondary settings, no more cohorting. I haven't met a principal or a teacher who hasn't while they appreciate why we need to do it, it has been challenging for them. So I think what we're doing today is actually going to make it easier for our teachers and our principals. That's the purpose as well, and getting back to normal life. So as I said, I would expect fair few happy teachers and principals around the state today with this announcement.
Just to confirm that this is the first the Teachers Federation would be finding out about the timing?
Well, look, conversations happen between certainly with our department agency staff and also with our stakeholders. I believe that there's also going to be an opportunity for all of our school staff to be briefed on this today, and we often do that. The reality is that our secretary, and I think Dr. Chan as well, will be involved in making sure that every teacher across the state has the ability to understand what will be coming into place for next week. But like I said, I would expect this to be a very welcome announcement from our teachers and principals, certainly in line with what I've experienced on the ground talking to our frontline teachers and principals, that they're pretty keen to see things back to normal.
What about parents? There will be some. What about parents? There will be some parents who will be quite nervous about masks going and about sort of a lot of restrictions are easing in schools. Do you think some parents will be concerned?
Oh, well, look, I think parents will understand that it is, it's time that we start to provide these opportunities for our children again. I think what's been really encouraging to me, particularly over the last few weeks, is that we've seen not only a high take-up of the rapid antigen test, and now, as the Premier mentioned, that move to making those kits available. We've surveyed about 100,000 parents and staff who all indicated that they were happy to take advice from their school about what is the best way forward. And I think parents know that as the Education Minister, we work very closely with our departments, with Dr. Chant, to make sure that we get these settings right, and they are based on the very best of health advice. I think, as Dr. Chant said, if there are any parents who are nervous, and particularly in primary schools, if you haven't yet gone out and had your child vaccinated, please do so. There's a week and a half until we see these mask changes in primary school. Many children in that primary school cohort will then start to be eligible for their second dose. from that week as well. We're also seeing really high attendance. You know, we are almost back to a pre-COVID attendance rate, which to me is very encouraging. I think that shows that parents have confidence in the measures that we have in place. The other thing that I would mention too is we often talk about the educational impacts of learning from home and how that can be challenging, and you know, there's absolutely no question about that. But also some of these other measures do have the ability to have an impact on education and social and emotional mental health and well-being. You know, not being able to be part of things like those buddy programs or be a fully fledged member of your school representative council or whatever it is. You know, kids know when they're missing out on things and it feels a bit different. So I don't think we should underestimate the power of making some of these changes and what it means. Also for mask wearing, particularly in our primary schools, you know, it's really challenging to teach young children how to form certain words or do that face-to-face relational teaching when your face is covered. So in time, you really do have to start to weigh up the educational impacts versus the health advice. And I think that's where we've got this balance right. As I said, very grateful to Dr. Chan and her team as to where we've landed, because I think that parents will understand why we're at this phase and why we can start to see a bit more of normal in terms of our school setting.
Minister, well, just
Yeah.
while you're at the mic,
Yeah.
if you had an inkling on a Sunday night that every school across the state was about to be closed down, would you stay up and involve yourself in the conversations, or would you go to bed comfortable in the knowledge that the bureaucrats could make the decision and not call you?
Look, you know, obviously I can see what you're inferring in your question there, Liz. The reality is, you know, that's up to individual ministers in terms of how they manage those issues. Well, like I said, I'm not going to comment on a hypothetical. The reality is, I think that, you know, most ministers are available around the clock, and I think that's probably the expectation from the Premier. But the reality is, you know, I'm not going to comment on situations that other ministers have found themselves in. I don't think that's my place.
Do you expect your Transport Minister to involve himself in the decisions that are being made if he had an inkling that the entire train network could be shut down?
Can I just address, just before I get to that, in relation to the Teachers Federation, there has been engagement, as the Minister has said, and even from my office. They might not know exactly the policy, but they certainly understood the direction that we were taking in relation to the changes that we've made today, and that engagement has been there with the Teachers Federation. The only other point I'd like to make, which I'm not sure was clear, the face masks as well be removed, not just in primary schools in the second week, but also for early childhood teachers across New South Wales. I want to make that clear for your reporting this evening. So it's primary school and early childhood and childcare across the state. Liz?
Premier, does it meet your expectations that the Transport Minister on the Sunday night, when he had an inkling that there could be major disruption in the rail network, went to bed comfortable, his word, in the knowledge that the bureaucrats could make the decisions without calling him?
Look, my expectation is that ministers are available around the clock, and I certainly am, and I expect the same of my ministers. Ultimately, though, if we go back to this situation, which is incredibly disappointing, what occurred across the rail network on Monday, and you know the inconvenience that caused many people, particularly on a day where kids are trying to get to school, parents are trying to get their kids to school, university started for the very first time, many people missed their first class, casual workers who rely on the train network to actually go to work and get paid weren't able to do so. So yes, I was incredibly disappointed, but
So if it's your expectation that ministers are available around the clock, does it meet your expectation that David Elliott went to bed and didn't expect a phone call? He's comfortable that he wasn't called.
Well, no, I think what's important here is the outcome.
Does the minister's actions meet your expectations as his boss? Has he met your expectations?
Well, the discussions that I've had with the minister is it was his understanding, it was the minister's understanding that the network, the rail network, would be operating in a not at full capacity, but we never expected that evening.
He told us yesterday he had an inkling that there would be industrial action and a mass disruption.
The advice that I've received is that there was no doubt on the Monday there would be challenges with the network. That's very different to the network being shut down, and I think let's not lose sight of the fact of what occurred here. There was an agreement reached in the Industrial Relations Commission on Saturday, it was very clear, and I think a common sense approach, that the timetable that would be utilised across the... Do you want me to pause or just keep going?
That'll go for a few minutes, so that's
Yeah, you might as well keep going.
That on Saturday, in relation to the agreement that was reached in the Industrial Relations Commission, that the timetable that was published on the 10th of February would be in operation on the Monday. We had made that very clear all the way through the outset. Now, when the union movement, the RTBU knew exactly what they were doing in changing the position prior to the operation of the network on the Monday. When Sydney Trains, and the advice I have from Sydney Trains over the course of this period of time, when Sydney Trains were advised that the master timetable would be in operation, they had the view that they could not safely operate the network and be able to match, based on those timetabling changes, the staffing with the operations of what is a very complex train network. Ultimately, the most important thing for a government is to ensure that we keep people safe and commuters safe. So that, just one sec. So that is the focus of the government, and I am completely satisfied with the decision that was made on Monday. In terms of that it was made for the reasons in relation to the safety of the network. I'm incredibly disappointed with the approach that the RTBU took following the agreement that was there in place on Saturday. So the situation would have been the same. Expected the question. My expectation is that my ministers are available 24/7. But the minister, David Elliott, was not called. So from my understanding, the advice that he had received was that the network would not be shut down on the Monday.
Premier,
But
is
he
it
said
acceptable?
Premier,
Multiple
he-
times he had an inkling.
Hold on, Ash.
But he said he was okay yesterday, that he wasn't called, and that he just trusted a transport bureaucrat to shut down the network. Are you okay that he didn't get the call and that he wouldn't have answered
No, he should have
the phone?
gotten the call. He should have got the call.
But
He
he
said
said
he
he
wouldn't
was
have
acceptable that he
okay.
wouldn't.
He
He said
said
he
he
wouldn't
was
have answered.
okay and he wouldn't have answered it. Is that good enough from one of the ministers who is responsible for the transport network?
Well, I think he will reflect on that and realise that if a phone call comes in at any point in time, you know, if there's a substantial issue facing the education system here in our state that comes to light at 3 o'clock in the morning, I expect Minister Mitchell to answer the phone.
So why did
Will-
you expect, so did you expect David Elliott
Well,
to
there was no,
answer?
but hold on, you're talking about a hypothetical situation.
No, we're not.
No, we're
it
not.
wasn't hypothetical.
It
No, because
literally
there was
happened
no-
on Monday.
No, because there was no, I'm saying there's a hypothetical situation in respect of the fact that call, there was no call made to the minister. There was, the minister was...
But he didn't care that there
No.
wasn't a phone call. He trusted the bureaucrat. So are you
As I
happy-
said, Ash, as I said, the minister will reflect on that and realise that all ministers are available 24/7. That's my expectation as Premier. The point is that there was no call made. There was no call made. The minister was the advice that I've received is the most recent information to the minister was that the network would not be shut down on Monday. So they are the facts.
But he had an inkling, he said multiple times yesterday, confirmed. He had an inkling on Sunday night, when he went to bed, with his phone ostensibly on silent, that there would be mass disruption and that the train network was not going to run smoothly. Did you have an expectation that he would involve himself in the decision-making process, or at least tell the bureaucrats, hey, can you give me a ring if you're making a massive decision?
My expectation is that ministers are immensely connected to the operational matters that are occurring within their portfolios. The reality is, you are talking about a hypothetical because the call never came through.
He did have it. You're saying that he had advice that there would not be a shutdown,
Yeah.
but he said yesterday.
Yeah.
So sorry, he must have told us something different than he's told you, because he told us multiple times yesterday that he did have an inkling that there was an issue.
My
Does
understanding.
that bother you?
My understanding was this industrial This industrial issue has obviously been ongoing for some time. We've had disruptions on the network for some time. The expectation is, particularly during the last 2 weeks, you know, even following the Sydney summit, you know, we've spoken very much about having the COVID timetable, enhanced weekend timetable in place. We obviously did expect there to be certain industrial action over the course of this week. I think that was certainly clear. The Minister, that's very different though. That's very different to a major decision to shut down the entire network.
Premier,
and he wasn't, and he had not been advised. He had not been advised, from my understanding, of that eventuality.
Premier, does the Transport Minister...
Still on the call, can you just confirm, sorry Louise, just to confirm just on the call, you said the call didn't come. Was there a call to his office, and did a member of his staff know, and was the choice of this call did not come from his office to him, or are you saying the call didn't come from his department to him? So I want to know, did a member of David Elliott's office know that the decision had been made to shut the network, and did they choose not to notify their boss?
So my understanding is that the advice that had been provided to the Minister's office was that there may be disruption on the network, but there was no advice. This is the understanding that I have.
Sure.
That there was no advice in respect of shutting down the network. So that I think we've got to be clear here. There's two issues. The whole situation is incredibly disappointing. Right, the whole situation, and I am very disappointed by it. And I'm working through those issues. But I also want to make this point that we wouldn't be here, and what happened on Monday would not have occurred, but for the RTBU making that decision to renege on the agreement that was entered into at the Fair Work Commission on the Saturday. That is still a fact, because the union movement disagreed with that position. I accept they disagree with that position, but it's not the union movement that runs the operation of the train network. The union movement has membership in relation to the staff that man the trains and the platforms. The ultimate decision needs to sit in terms of making a call on the safety of the network, not with the union movement, but with Sydney Trains. And if Sydney Trains take the view, based on the late change that occurred on Sunday, based on the actions of the RTBU, Sydney Trains had no other choice in relation to take the action that they did. And I am completely satisfied with that response. Disappointed that we got to that point, but I'm satisfied that the outcome was the right outcome, because safety is paramount. And I would also expect that if the Minister were to be made aware of that decision, then he should have followed that advice from Sydney Trains. There was no alternative. And if I had been advised, which I was not, if I had been advised, I would have supported the position from Sydney Trains, because my responsibility as Premier is to keep people safe and commuters safe on the train network.
But Premier, that's a statement. Premier, the Chief of Staff of David Elliott's Chief of Staff signed off on a statement at 1:50 a.m.
Right.
that was going to go out saying there would be no trains. So how does that align with the timing that David Elliott has given you?
Well, my understanding, in the late hours of the evening, that David Elliott, the Minister Elliott's office, was advised it would be disruption.
And didn't tell him though. If they've sent out a public approved a public statement to go out at 1:50 a.m. but they didn't tell the Minister.
Well, I'm not across that.
Premier,
You cranky, sorry, you go, James. Oh.
when were you first told that there would be major disruption to the network on Monday, and what did you do about it when you were told there would be major disruption?
On Monday morning, when I was advised of the situation,
Were you told on Sunday that there would be?
no,
that
I was
there
told
would
on
likely be
the
major
advice.
disruption?
The advice I received at about 9:45 on Sunday evening was, whilst matters had not been resolved in the Fair Work Commission, that the timetable would likely be operating either at the COVID weekend timetable or the enhanced timetable, and that was the advice I received at 9:45 at night.
So David Elliott's office didn't tell you that there would be disruptions to the network?
No, I think there was always an expectation that may have occurred. I'll check that. That's the advice I personally received. In relation to disruption, I think there was always an expectation that the network would have challenges, not just on the Monday, but over the course of the week, exactly like we're seeing today. That there was we're still seeing that today, and I'm still disappointed, by the way, about. Unions need to negotiate in good faith. They cannot put commuters at risk. We cannot have congestion on the rail system. And as I said, make no mistake, you can't have. It was no accident that Mark Morrie was out on the Monday, saying we're going to have a year of chaos. The role that the unions need to work with the government and focus on the people of our state, and the Labor Party need to focus on the people of our state as well, not inflame and encourage union strike action across our state, which is exactly what they're doing.
You would have seen
Anyway,
the legal advice prepared by DPC about the decision made on Sunday night and in the early hours of Monday morning.
Yeah.
Is it your belief that Rob Sharp and Matt Longland, or Sydney Trains bureaucrats, broke the law by not telling David Elliott that they were shutting down the network?
It's not my. They're complex issues, and I'm seeking advice on it.
Well, you're
Well,
in
you
terms,
you would have read the advice.
Well, yeah, working through the advice and seeking further details.
Well,
about
you
it.
Because
know,
legally,
so
though,
in
Sonia,
terms of-
legally they must
Yeah,
supply the minister or
I
a
know,
person
I've read it.
nominated.
I've read it.
So, by not doing that, did they
Well,
break the law?
that needs to be interpreted, and I'm seeking advice.
Will you
aside from
release that
breaking the
legal
law,
advice?
aside from
That's an assumption.
well, yes. So that issue.
Yeah.
Are you very cranky with these transport bureaucrats, the head of Sydney Trains and Rob Sharp as the Secretary for Transport New South Wales, for not picking up the phone?
I'm incredibly disappointed with the whole situation.
No. Just in terms of Transport New South Wales, if the finger is being pointed at Transport New South Wales for not picking up the phone, what is your response to that action that they did?
Well, as I said, I'm working through those issues. I'm working through the legal issues that James has referred to. I should have been advised. I'm Premier of the state, and I don't get a call at whatever time in the morning to let me know the train network's going down.
And
Premier.
So, I'm working through this. I'm not going to have a knee-jerk response. I'm working through the issues to ensure this doesn't happen again.
Premier,
Premier,
do
Premier,
you,
Premier,
Premier?
Premier. Statement
Hold
on
on.
Sunday.
But what I can't guarantee won't happen again is the disruption that occurred on the network on Monday, because the substantive issue here is the actions the unions took on Sunday. Let's not forget what the unions did on Sunday, and they reneged on the agreement that was put in place on the Saturday, and then didn't rock up on Sunday evening at the Fair Work Commission to provide directions to their legal team in relation to the operation of the network. I mean, that is the substantive. Let's not lose sight of the substantive issue that is in play here, and that is the union movement caused chaos on the rail network on Monday. Sydney Trains have an obligation to keep people safe. So does the New South Wales government. And if they form a view as the operator of the network that based on the actions that the union movement took on Sunday, that they could not match the staff in the rail system with the timetable that came out of the blue from the union movement, the right action here, the right action was taken. Safety is paramount for commuters on our network. My job as Premier is to keep people safe. And let's not lose sight here of what occurred over the course of the weekend. So, am I disappointed and incredibly frustrated with what occurred? Yes, I am. But there's a number of factors at play in relation to what occurred on Monday. And the most substantive issue, the most substantive problem that occurred on Monday was what the RTBU did. And they did it, and they knew exactly what the likely outcome would be. And that is that Sydney Trains could not operate a network safely on the Monday.
Premier, do
Okay.
you have
Last
full
one,
Premier,
everybody.
Premier, do you have
Please.
do you have full
Last
confidence?
question.
Premier,
Last
do you have
question.
full confidence in David Elliott that he is up to the job of being your transport minister?
Yes.
Last one.
Have you
Even
seen the
David
safety
Elliott's-
risk assessment? Have you seen the risk assessment? Have you seen the evidence that there was a safety issue?
Yeah, I'm working through that. I have
It
spoken.
has been 3 days
I'm-
now. Why have you not seen
No,
it?
it's come. No, I've worked through this over
Premier,
the last.
it is Wednesday. The
Please.
decision was made on Sunday
Yes,
night.
yes.
Why have you not
the
seen
advice,
the risk assessment?
The advice that I've received from Sydney Trains and working through this issue most of the day, last 2 days, the advice from Sydney Trains, you know, as Premier, when you're talking about sensitive operations, you need to take advice from those people who operate the network. And I am satisfied, based on the numerous discussions I've had with Sydney Trains over the last 48 hours, completely satisfied, based on the concerns that were raised on the Monday in relation to safety, that Sydney Trains made the right decision.
But you
Premier,
haven't
even
seen any
everybody.
evidence.
Because I had
Thanks,
I've seen
everybody.
briefings in my office.
Premier,
I've gone through
David
briefings in my
Premier,
office.
Premier,
even David
Premier,
Elliott's
Premier,
comments
Premier.
yesterday,
Look,
Premier.
I've worked through all of those issues to satisfy myself that the right decision was made. That was the first point I needed to get to in circumstances where I was not advised of the decision.
Premier, given
Premier,
David
you will
Elliott.
face consequences over this decision.
Well, I'm working through that, and obviously with the legal advice as well, I'm working through. I said I'm incredibly disappointed by what occurred.
Can you
Right.
assure the people of New South Wales that someone will face consequences?
If there are circumstances that meet that situation, of course.
Give-
But ultimately, my job is to get the trains back to full capacity as quickly as possible. That's my expectation, and it's the unions that are standing in the way. Let's just not lose sight of what's going on here. Not only did the network get shut down on Monday, it's still running at limited capacity today. Our trains are congested in circumstances because of the behaviour of the union movement. And what they did, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Premier.
Make no mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing. They're not even hiding it. They flagged their punches. Now, my focus is on the people of our state every single day. And when it comes to industrial issues, and my expectation is that ministers will work through those challenges on a reasonable basis. On a reasonable basis. Now, when it comes, and I make this point, when it comes to pay, we've had, and I understand we've had the 2.5% wages cap here in New South Wales since coming to office in 2011. Now, over the course of that period, we have seen public sector wages rise at a greater rate than inflation. Last year, here in our state, over the course of that period of time, we had 300,000 people in New South Wales lose their jobs in the private sector. It's the taxes in the private sector that pay for the public sector. Now, if you look around the country in relation to the wages policy, it's only New South Wales and Queensland that have wage increases at 2.5%. Victoria, the Labor state of Victoria, has had wages at 2% up to the 31st of December last year, and 1.5% from 1 January this year. The Western Australian Labor government has had wages paused, just $1,000 payment, so no wage increase for a number of years now. The Northern Territory, a Labor territory, has put 4 years, no increases in public sector wages. And the reason they're in that position is because their budgets are not strong. Now, we have put, over the course of the 2 years of the pandemic, $46 billion in support measures, not just into the health system, but into assistance for businesses to get through, to keep people in work. It is a balancing act. It's not an easy one, but it's a balancing act. But I ask you this. Are the unions protesting in Victoria? Are they protesting in WA? Are they protesting in the other Labor states around the country? at a time when it is only New South Wales and Queensland that have pay increases of 2.5%, are the heads of the unions in those states saying they're going to cause mass chaos. What we saw on the same day that the head of the unions said they're going to have mass chaos across the state, we had mass chaos on our network.
Premier,
That is no accident. That is no accident. And the Labor Party can stand with union bosses. I'll stand with the people of our state. But I want to make this very clear. You should look at the facts, look at what's happening around the country, and draw your own conclusions.
Thanks,
Premier,
everybody.
you said you were
Last one,
disappointed
please.
that you weren't told about the shutdown and that you should have been told about the shutdown. Surely there's only two possible people that could be responsible for not telling you. So was it Rob Sharp or was it David Elliott?
Well, I'm unaware of
to blame
that,
for not
but
telling
what I
you?
do know is that Minister Elliott, from the advice that I have received, was not made aware. Minister
Did he
Elliott,
did he ask to be made
Minister-
aware? Did he updated throughout the night?
well, they had questions for Minister Elliott. What I have said is, and what I know, and I've had numerous discussions with Minister Elliott over the course of the last 24 hours, 48 hours, that Minister Elliott was not advised of the shutdown of the network when he went to bed that evening. They're facts. They're facts. And the other fact, to not lose sight of here, is the network went down on Monday morning because of the behaviour of the unions. The RTBU, who caused the chaos on our system that put Sydney trains in an untenable position to run the network safely. My job as Premier is to ensure we have safety on our rail network. And any view that somehow the operator, if the operator was to provide advice to me, to the Minister, to the government, that the train network could not operate safely based on the changes that were made following the agreement that was entered into on Saturday. There is absolutely no position the government could have been into to not support and follow that advice.
Premier, was it
Thanks,
Rob Sharp's
everybody.
responsibility
Sorry.
to call you or David Elliott's responsibility to call you?
But David Elliott was not made aware.
So it's
There was
Rob
nothing,
Sharp's
there was nothing,
responsibility then?
there was nothing. Well, I'm not sure of that information as well. We're working through that. I've asked.
Not legally, but just in terms of the chain of command. You lead the government. He should have told you.
Who?
Rob Sharp.
No, I mean, the minister should have been advised, in my view, that decision was being made. He was not provided that advice. So we will work through that. And the point I've made, Amelia, is, I will, once I've ascertained the full extent of the situation, then I'll take whatever action is required to ensure that doesn't happen again. That's my job, and that's what I certainly intend on doing.
Is
Just in
there
terms
friction
of- just
between the minister and Rob Sharp that has potentially led to or contributed to the fact that there was a breakdown
Not
in
that I'm aware of.
communication?
Not that I'm aware of.
David Elliott.
Just in terms of how the government runs, and I think the public deserve to know,
Yeah.
for ultimate sign-off, does it come to the Minister and the Premier for something like that? Is that
It should-
what
it
should
should-
have
it
happened?
should-
Have we got these, faceless bureaucrats just running stuff and they can make whatever decisions they like?
My understanding is it should have been provided to the minister.
Well, for
The minister's
Fine.
the minister is the elected official. The minister, I always say this, ultimately responsibility lies with the executive government, and that's the ministers that's the ministers here in the New South
So
Wales.
how is it that then a transport bureaucrat just
Well, let's get the facts first as we work through. I mean, I'm working through that issue, and as I've said, I've committed that once I've understood every step of the way what has occurred, I'll take the requisite action.
So you don't still know who pulled the trigger? You don't know who, like
No, it's
48 hours
very-
later,
it-
who
well,
flicked
no,
the switch?
That comes down to a final, the final sign-off and approval. The reality is, Sydney Trains, as the operator, need to provide advice to the government in relation to the safe operations of the network.
But who
If
gave the
they-
final
But if
sign-off?
we'll work through that.
How
So you
do
still
not
don't know that yet?
Well, it looks like it's come through the department, but Minister Elliott was not made aware. So that's what I'm saying. I am incredibly frustrated and disappointed with this whole situation, And once, you know, it's not having a knee-jerk reaction. You need to work through what occurred on Saturday into Sunday was, for the outcome that occurred on Monday, was not expected, was not an expected outcome. And I'll work through those issues. Once I finalise the view, what was most important to me, to Liz's question, was to satisfy myself that the correct action was taken. And I'm completely satisfied that the view that Sydney Trains reached in respect of the decision to shut down the network on Monday, in respect of commuter safety, was the right one.
You're
How
saying
is
two
that-
you
different
had been
things. You're
told,
saying two
so if you
different
had been
things.
told that night, you would have agreed with it.
Yes.
You're saying two different things. That the executive government is ultimately responsible,
Yep.
but it's the operator that makes a decision. So who is responsible for shutting down?
Ministers are
the
responsible, but
network?
ultimately, if you receive advice, what I'm saying to Lachlan's point, if there's a breakdown in process here, it needs to be rectified, and I will rectify that. What I'm saying, and obviously you've raised the legal issues, what I'm saying is, what was most important to me as Premier was satisfying myself that in relation to the advice that Sydney Trains provided, that the right decision was made on Monday morning, and it was. So ultimately, you focus on that's the outcome that's important, and I'm satisfied that the outcome that was obtained was the right outcome.
Where are you going to
Now,
get
in
to
relation,
the legal issues?
then in relation to the process, well, I'm finalising through that and finalising that and working through it. The technical legal issues are complex, and I need to continue to get advice. I've sought that advice, and I'm working through it.
How do you now convince people that and give them confidence that you're on top of things when it looks like, you've got bureaucrats not telling you things, that you're not actually really running the show?
Well, what we saw on Sunday was chaos caused by the unions.
So your
reneging-
government can be brought down by a
There was-
union that
there-
easily?
Well, there was an agreement that was entered into on the Saturday that was reneged on the Sunday.
And what advice are you basing
And
that?
at a time, I expect, Ash, there to be substantial challenges this year, because that's what the union movement has flagged. They've called it chaos across our state. I think that's incredibly disappointing. I'm going to continue to work every single day for the people of our state. I think this is politically motivated. The point I'm trying to, the reason I'm raising with you what is occurring around the country is that there's some semblance of understanding of what is actually occurring with the union bosses in this state and their connection to the Labor Party to cause chaos over 2022. That's what I mean. We've got a situation with health workers where, if you look at the Victorian hospital system, it's in Code Brown. They're using hotels as hospitals. No protests in Victoria. No protests in Victoria.
But Premier, I think the question was, how are you in control when you're only notified on Monday of an incident?
I should have been notified.
But are you in control?
Well, as I said, absolutely. And as I said to Amelia's question, there's clearly been a breakdown in process, and I will work through that, determine what should have occurred that did not occur, and I'll fix it.
Will there be consequences?
Well, I'll work. That depends on the findings once I work through this matter.
How long, when are we expecting that? When are we expecting those sort of?
Well, I'm seeking the advice. Over the last 48 hours, I've been working through the advice. As I said to you, that my first point of call was making sure the decision was the right one. So that was the most important call, and now we'll work through this and make sure it doesn't happen again in the way that it occurred. But make no mistake, I mean, I know you're getting focused on process, and I accept process is incredibly important, but the outcome would not have been different. The outcome was the right outcome to protect the safety of commuters on the train network.
Premier, just on a completely different issue, sorry everyone. Powerhouse Museum construction site is flooded for the third time in 3 years.
Yeah.
Does the government now regret selecting that site for the powerhouse?
No, not at all. And the advice that we've received is when it is constructed, that it will be constructed in a way that ensures that it's constructed in a way for safety in a 1 in 1,000 year flood. So simply because there may be flooding in the area, there's flooding right across the state as a result of the storms over the last 2 days. The Powerhouse Museum in Parramatta will be constructed in a way that protects itself from a 1 in 1,000 year weather event. So we have complete confidence. The advice we've received is that it's safe to build the Powerhouse Museum there, and we're just getting on with the job. And there are always going to be challenges. I always say with our infrastructure agenda, there will always be challenges with it because we're building so much of it.
Is it going to blow out the cost though for building it, seeing it keeps flooding the site?
No, the site is being constructed in a way that protects itself from a 1 in 1,000 year flood. That was always the case when we went down this path. What occurred yesterday into today is not a 1 in 1,000 year flood. And if that occurred when the Powerhouse Museum was constructed, it wouldn't have any impact on it at all.
And Premier, just finally,
Lucy, fine.
what are the triggers for tightening COVID restrictions, if indeed we need to do that this year?
Well, you know, obviously we continue to work with our health teams in relation to that. I mean, the challenge we have as we move through 2022 is, and particularly into winter, that we would expect there to be further increases in case numbers. As I said and made it very clear recently, as we've opened up our state and released restrictions in New South Wales, increase in cases or decreases in cases are not a sign of success or failure. Right. So
what does that mean for the triggers? Is there a number? Is there a metric?
No,
or hospitalisations?
we obviously work through that very closely. ICU and hospitalisations are, we've always said, our key focus points for the government as we move through. We are on a daily basis monitoring the health system here in our state. As I said, I've made it very clear, we've built up a very strong health system in New South Wales. Our nurses have done an amazing job, our doctors, our allied health professionals right through the pandemic. They continue to work tirelessly to look after the people of our state. Ultimately, our responsibility is the health and welfare of the people of New South Wales. That's our focus. At the same time, that's always balanced, as we have over the last 2 years. Balance that very clearly with ensuring that we open up today's announcement in terms of getting kids back in school, the educational outcomes. There are many, many factors that we look at, and as we move through, we'll continue to work through our health teams. But people should have the confidence of where we sit today, and whether it's New South Wales or whether it's Australia, you take a step back, you look at the death rate, you look at the economy, you look at people in jobs. We have a lot to be proud about as a state and as a nation for where we sit in the course of this pandemic and our response to the pandemic. I know people are critical. You know, we get criticised for opening up too quickly. Victorian government gets criticised for shutting down too quickly. But if you take all the approaches right across our country, and whilst there's been different views at different times, that's only natural in a pandemic, I think the efforts that people have made across our state and across our country have put us in a very strong position. Thanks.
He walks off and I'm just like